Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to use events in Unity and also how to use them in a game to decouple some of your behaviors. So first, let's start by creating an empty object to represent an enemy, and I'm going to create a script that will happen, let's say, that will handle the behavior when an enemy dies. So I'm just going to call it death. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create a delegate. So all a delegate does is it's kind of like um, a prototype or a requirement for all the functions that will subscribe to our event. So all the functions that subscribe to our event, in the case of this delegate, have to return void and have no parameters. So fairly simple, but they must match this uh, method signature. Then we create our event here. So the event will be of type death handler, and we can call it on death. And here you can think of this, it's important to think of this as a variable and not a function, even though it gets called as a function. And that's sort of confusing, but when you think of it as a variable, what's going to follow is going to make a bit more sense. So the way events work is we can add functions or methods to events, and whenever we call the event, all of the functions that have been added to that event will also be called. So you need to use well, you don't need to, but it's suggested to use on enable and on disable. That way, functions that are listening to the event will be removed once the actual thing that's calling them is removed. Don't worry too much about that. It's just a good habit to get into. So let's just get these set up. Now let's say for an enemy, for example, a couple of different things need to happen when an enemy dies. For one, loot needs to be generated and experience needs to be given to the player. So let's do that. So we're going to do public void generate loot. Not that. And let's also do give experience. So for generate loot, we're just going to use some debug commands. Of course, in reality, you'd replace this with actual mechanic for generating loot. So let's just do got iron sword for generate loot, and then do got 200 EXP. So in this case, usually these functions won't be in the same class, and I'll show you how to make them in a different class soon. But for now, I'm just going to do it like this. And so to actually add these functions to the onDeath event, what we're going to do is going to do onDeath plus equals, and then the function name without any parentheses. And again, this is why it's better to think of this as kind of like a variable rather than a function, because kind of the way we're incrementing it, even this function here is being treated as a variable. Yeah, it's weird to think about the first time you're kind of getting used to it. So, and this will just be give exp. And then similarly here on disable, we actually want to remove these from the onDeath event. Okay, now for example, one way you'd call this is, let's say an enemy took damage. So let's call this take damage method. And of course we need to create this, so we'll do that real quick. Okay, so in the take damage method, we're just gonna do, let's create like a variable HP, and if HP equals 0, then we're going to call our onDeath event. Just like that. And here you stop treating it like a variable and you start treating it as a function again. But anyway, what will happen is when I call this onDeath event, generate loot and give experience will also be called. So let's give that a try and see if it works. So it's already on enemy. Let's go to play mode. And here you go. So we got the iron sword and we got 200 EXP. Now it's important to note here, so what if for loot we needed to have a reference to our enemy in order to know what loot actually got generated? We can do that, but it needs to match up with our delegate declaration. Remember, like I said before, the function headers of your delegate and everything that's subscribing to the onDeath event, they need to have the same function header. That's why I'm getting an error here. No overload for generate loot matches delegate death handler. So let's fix that. All we need to do is go back to our delegate and add a game object enemy. And now you'll notice that this one still needs to be fixed. So every function that's subscribing to the event needs to match the header of the death handler delegate. And now finally, when we call onDeath, when you call this event, you need to kind of give it the variable so that it can propagate through to all of the different functions that subscribe to it. So for now, we can just give it its own game object, just to make everything happy. Now here, what you could do is, for example, I'll just put it in a comment, but if there's an enemy.name equals skeleton, then give it an iron sword. Otherwise, if it's a dragon, maybe you'd give it something a little more powerful or rare, whatever. Okay, so that's the basics. Now I'm going to go a little bit more in depth. The really cool thing about events is that you can actually almost completely decouple the actual event and all the functions that subscribe to that event. So in this case, what we can do is we can actually declare this as static. And here we will remove all of this stuff. And we leave this because we need some way for the event to actually be called. But now what we can do is, let's actually make like a loot system and an XP system, for example, just so it lines up. And we'll create a script, maybe just for a loot system for now. And now what we can do is we can use those on and enable functions again. And then because this is static, we can now access this from anywhere. So death.onDeath plus equals, and let's make the function right here. Oh. Why do I expect IntelliSense to guess what I'm thinking? Anyway, so just for a simple example, oh, and we can't forget we also need this game object enemy here because it needs to match the delegate signature. And then simply, like we did before, we add this generate loot here. And then let's just make sure we're cleaning up in case this component ceases to exist in the future. We want to make sure that it's not being called when the event triggers. Okay, so that should work. We can also add it to EXP system like we did before, but I think you guys kind of get it. So let's review what will happen here. On start, this take damage will trigger. Take damage will call the event, and then even though the event knows nothing about the loot system, but the loot system can subscribe itself to the event and be notified whenever an enemy dies, and then generate loot appropriately. Again, you can use this enemy parameter to determine what loot gets generated. So let's just make sure, oops, we have all the appropriate scripts. So you can see that this generate loot function was called, even though again it has the loot system is pretty decoupled from the event, and it was able to just subscribe to it and listen to this on death message. And that's it. So I hope that kind of helped you guys understand a little bit about events. There's also something called actions, which are they're basically like events, except you don't need a delegate for actions. And I believe Unity events are similar to actions. But yeah, you can find out more about those from other videos. Maybe I'll make one in the future. But that's it for today, and thanks for watching.